assuming we're all there we go. Okay, so we're recording, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, magic, we've done that. So what I wanted to do, as I say, was just give a little bit of a refresh, or dig a little bit deeper into it. And the book is called, obviously, Radical Candor. And what I thought would be interesting, actually, just to think about first is that name, because the word radical here actually came about because of the belief that such conversations are quite rare. So it's quite radical to be having conversations in this quadrant. And so it doesn't, when we're talking about being radically candid, we probably don't want to be radically candid, because that means we're being, candid in every now and then. Perhaps, as I say, just the idea of being candid, but really being quite clear on this care factor. The idea being that, let's say up here, at the top of the care factor, the care axis, let's just say this is love up here. Like, I love whoever we're talking to here. Down here, this is common human decency. So at the where the y-axis intersects with the x-axis here, let's just say that as a bare minimum, we're coming at this with common human decency. Anything less than that, we're starting to actively not care. We're down here, we want them dead, right? So up here, we love them. Down here, we want them dead. And in the middle is we're coming at it with common human decency. And so when we couple that with the ability to challenge directly, and that doesn't have anything to do with being aggressive, because that's when we fall below the line. This is just being able to see something and say something. I think Jean used that phrase, being clear on something, quite clear and kind with it. And recognizing that there are degrees to this. So obviously a conversation here, if we just locate someone here, so obviously, like, this is high love, this is getting up there, and it's something that we're being really quite strong on. That's going to sound different to something. So again, we could be the same person, we could still care for them highly, but it might be something that doesn't need as much of a forthright or strong challenge, but we are treading, we might be treading gently here, but we are treading. And what we talk about here is, well, if we get that, and we talk about, we've used some of those phrases already, psychological safety and trust, and we get change and growth in this. Now, one of the things that Kim uses, which she talks about respectful confrontation. And for me, if I was writing it, I'd sort of challenge this word. I think this word in itself can be confrontational. It sort of, again, it puts up this this ambience, this atmosphere that there's going to be some kind of battle. And and there might be, but confrontation is very different from challenge or discussion or whatever else it might be. But the gist of it is, wherever possible, whether it's professionally or personally in our relationships, chances are, in the long term, it's going to be better if we can be here. Now, that's in a nutshell. However, it's not uncommon for us to sometimes come here. And coming here is when we actually don't particularly care for them. So it's dropped below that. And because we don't particularly care for them, we kind of keep a bit quiet. In fact, it's more of the case that we probably care more about ourselves than we do them. We're more worried about what we'll look like if we do something than any sense of wanting to impact them or make a change or whatever. And so this is an example here, where we might just keep quiet on an issue. We might. What's actually not uncommon here is that if there is an issue, and this is particularly if we don't like them or we fall below this common human decency, we might stay quiet about the issue to them, but we might be quite talkative about the issue to others about them. So, for example, if someone's if someone's not getting programs in properly, or if someone's late, or if someone seems to be a bit disorganized, or perhaps they're having issues with kids or whatever it might be, for whatever reason, we don't take it up with them. We don't talk to them about it, but we might find ourselves talking to other people about it. And if we go back to some of the work we did, I think in our very first session when we were talking about no triangles, in Rachel Robinson's stuff about respect trumps harmony, I think there's a nice little correlation there. We'll often go and talk about somebody else to somebody else rather than the actual person who we should be talking about it to. And over time, once people find out that this is the norm, because you've probably had this phenomenon yourself where you realize that this person is always talking to you about other people. So I wonder who they're talking to about you. And over time, it might not be that big a deal, but over time, it kind of just starts adding up and building to this point where there's a lot of mistrust in the environment. And there's obviously, if we're not talking about to the person specifically, then we don't see any change or growth. On the other side of this is when we do actually challenge people, but we don't particularly care for that person. Whatever reason, we've dropped below. And there can be any I think one of the things to recognize is that going below that line is perfectly normal human behavior. We can only be slighted so often. We can only be let down so many times. The problem with normal human behavior is it's often not very useful if you're a leader. And so being a leader is part of the big challenge of that is trying to be mindful of that normal human behavior and recognizing when it's not helpful or not appropriate. And so this obnoxious aggression, and again, think of it in terms of, I guess what I should have pointed out here as well is the different degrees of this. So if I actually just go back before we talk about that, back here, so manipulative insincerity back here could just be keeping quiet on something and not saying anything to anyone else, but it comes even more manipulatively insincere if we start always raising the shortcomings of someone, going, oh, do you think they're all right? Do you think they're coping? Do you think, but actually not doing anything proactive in order to ascertain whether they're coping or not, and then helping them out of that situation. Over on the obnoxious aggression side, this is the bit where, again, if we've fallen below that line, but we're not afraid to take someone on, something here could be as simple as an eye roll or a tut, almost subconsciously, seriously, whereas over here could be quite, well, as the language sort of suggests, quite obnoxious, quite aggressive. And I don't know, I've not seen it as prominently in schools as I would do, say, in football clubs or in some bad corporate environments, but where it can be really overt, the aggression and the disrespect can be quite overt to people. I don't know if that's the case in schools or if I'm making a huge generalization here, but typically it's not uncommon to see a few things here, less so the real overt stuff. But again, if we think about the language that we use, sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, I just need to be brutally honest with them. Just need to be brutally honest. Well, you don't. You don't need to be brutally honest. You need to be honest, but can we tone down the brutality and at least get back to some level of common human decency, and then, if possible, start moving up this axis. One of the interesting things, and I've been having this conversation actually with a number of people around various scenarios, both professional and personal, because what if you are genuinely here with this particular person? You're here for whatever reason. It's been months, years, just constant degradation of a relationship, of trust, of whatever it might be. Sometimes it can be really hard when you have someone like me saying, well, no, you've got to get above that. Sometimes it can be really hard to do that. It's not natural to do that. All our self-preservation strategies are kicking in to not want to put ourselves out there again in order to, be a victim or feel the wrath or whatever it might be that means we're here in the first place. But one of the things I've been asking people to consider is, and I think I mentioned this in fact, I know I mentioned this in the conversation with Kim, is if you are here and you're finding it hard to really care about the person, can you find a reason to care about the relationship? So an example I might have is, two leaders in a team, in a leadership team, who really do not get on for whatever reason, and they don't care about each other. But the work that needs to be done is to get them to establish, we need to care about the relationship, the space in between, because of all the flow-on effects. Perhaps I'm working with parents who have split up in really acrimonious circumstances, and they cannot stand each other. But it's really important that whilst they might not care for each other anymore, they need to care for that relationship because for what it means for their kids. And so it's a massive challenge, and it's hard work to do that. But again, I'm going to suggest that perhaps once we take on the responsibility of leadership or parenting or whatever it might be, we're almost obligated to make sure that we are aware of that phenomenon and recognizing that, because unquestionably it impacts the way we act, and then the way it flows onto the people around us.
Would you have a honest conversation with that person and say, this is where I think we need to be, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you can think that, knowing, this is the relationship, and we need to work together because, yes, we're parents of children, or we're part of the exec team at school. And so is it sort of being honest and just stating what it is that where you want to see it going, a relationship?
I think in the most challenging of circumstances, I think a third person is useful to kind of mediate between that. One of the things I sometimes like to, and not that I do this necessarily, certainly not in a personal setting, but in a professional setting, is ascertain, well, what is it you want? What is it you want? But we're doing this completely individually. So let's say that it's me and Kieran that are at odds, and Courtney's sort of mediating. What Courtney's trying to do is trying to show, because invariably we can find some crossover. There'll be some things where we just don't agree, but there'll be some synergy somewhere along the line, unless we've completely broken down. But what is it Kieran wants? What is it I want? And then recognizing, well, okay, in order for us both to get what we want, there's certain norms or things that we need to work on. And it starts with caring about, we both want these same, caring about the relationship, not so we're best mates and we're going to go out for beers or whatever, but caring about the relationship and working in a way that achieves these things which we've both said independently are important for us and our organization. This is why marriage counselors are, get what they, have a job, because they're trying to sort of work that out there. And as I say, I certainly don't venture into that territory. But in terms of organizational stuff, once people realize that they're actually more similar than they think, It's quite interesting to see how they can put some differences aside. Again, I'm not saying we're all going to be best buds, but recognizing that a lot of the time, with a lot of these differences that we're perceiving, a lot of the drama that's built up has just been a gradual eroding of this trust, a gradual buildup of other stuff. And it's a case of being able to be courageous enough to say, all right, well, I think it's time that we address this. And as I say, whether that's someone else, I think it's difficult, perhaps, Margaret, if it has got to that point and you suddenly get on the front foot and do that, I think that might be hard to do. But setting up an environment or some kind of opportunity to be able to say, hey, maybe we need to reset, and doing that as a bit of a group or something, and then having a third person in or whatever to try and navigate that could be helpful. Someone who's not emotionally invested in things is really useful in that case, I think. So if we head back on to this slide here, so this last one here is probably, I don't know, but it's probably where we find most of our people as to what the people we work with as to why then, you know, they're not talking. Is actually, it's not because I don't care about them, it's because I really care about them and I don't want to upset them. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to damage the relationship. And so in Bob's case, I think Kim points out that, yeah, there was a bit of this, but also recognizing we can probably put ourselves in more than one quadrant at one time, particularly either side of, you know, so it's possible to be here and here at times. It's possible to be here and here at times. Sometimes if we don't get the balance right, we can bounce between these two. And without putting words in your mouth, Jean, but perhaps sometimes, you know, in your quest to be here, as you said yourself, sometimes you might come across as a bit brash, which I wouldn't say is obnoxiously aggressive, but perhaps it's kind of, you know, it might come across as being here. You know, Jean's really keen on challenging, but I get the sense that maybe she's not that bothered about me. And as I say, I'm just using that as an illustration. I'm certainly not saying that is the case. So, you know, when we think about this, it's one thing to have the framework, but it's another to actually start thinking about, well, okay, well, what does that actually mean for me? So I think what I'd like to do before we do anything else is just get some of that thinking around there for you, or hear some of your thinking. What does that mean for you? Looking at this framework, seeing it in front of you, as opposed to just hearing Kim talk about it, what does this mean for you in your work or elsewhere in your life? Is it something that resonates with you? Can you literally see yourself in different quadrants with different people? Do you know when you've been put in a quadrant by someone else, for example, when someone's been candid with you versus kept quiet with you? Have you ever had that phenomenon of, why didn't you just tell me? I'd have fixed it. What comes up for you when you look at this?
Yeah, I think as you were talking through it, each sort of quadrant you went through, I was sort of thinking about situations where I would have fallen into potentially any of the quadrants, probably mostly into ruinous empathy in terms of, you know, sort of the situation that with Bob, in terms of, you know, you don't want to hurt people's feelings. You want to maintain that relationship in terms of them feeling like you're there to support them, but really no growth or change is happening. And so I guess the thing with being in the ruinous empathy phase is it's probably easier to then move into radically candor, being in radical candor. But I just feel like the ones that are probably more falling into manipulative insincerity, where the care has dropped a little bit over time, potentially for that person, then I think you have to, then I'm thinking about the relationships that will have to be mended before that can really happen.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So it'd be real. it would be hard, wouldn't it, if you've been below that line, just to suddenly walk in one day and
yeah, I think there's a lot of work that sort of needs to go in before then being radically candid can even happen.
Yeah.
Start building that trust and that relationship back up again.
Okay. Yep. Someone else, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I mean, I while you were talking about that, and I was looking at it when I was listening to the podcast as well. There are different situations in my life where I've fallen into all of those, and to different degrees. But like Kieran said, I think if you drop below that line, you know, about how you feel about somebody, it kind of avoids you kind of challenging, because then you fall into that obnoxious aggression. So how do you build the relationship back up enough to be able to challenge then, and have it sit in the candor rather than the aggression?
Yeah. So you mentioned that you've fallen into each of those quadrants before. And using the one that you've just brought up, if you've fallen into obnoxious aggression, so you feel like you've been there before, have you managed?
Probably personally more than professionally,
Yeah,
like, you know.
Yeah. But have you managed, in your experience, have you been able to get above the line, so to speak?
Yeah, I have, but you have to want to, and so that's the difference, and it's not easy, so it takes a lot of work, and so you have to, you know, I mean, I've also been in a case where I haven't been able to get it back up above the line, so that kind of care factor. And has it gone too far? Have you let it go too far? Is the other person prepared to come on board too? Because that makes a difference as well.
Because it can be quite an interesting one, can't it? Because you can go from being obnoxious aggression, and the easiest place to go to, because it would be ruinous empathy, say, you know what, I'm just going to keep quiet. You know what, you do you. I'll see you at Christmas. And you just kind of keep quiet, and there'll be all kinds of things building up, but you know what, I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah. And I think, for me, like, I mean, in the situation I'm thinking about in my own sort of family life, that sort of situation is like probably did sit in that ruinous empathy for a time until it got to a point where you kind of pushed me over the edge to the other way, you know, like, and then you sort of, the ruinous empathy causes in a lot of ways and drops you below the line in terms of how you care, and then at some point that, you know, do you caring about yourself sometimes?
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I was thinking about, you know, on the care part, if thinking about a couple of people in particular dropping, me occasionally dropping below the common decency in terms of care. But, you know, I think from my perspective anyway, there have been times where that's gone above common decency, and I was thinking about how did I get to that point, or how was I able to build that up. And I think in one particular professional relationship, and then the other one was a family member, I think it's just the building of empathy that helps me to then be able to go up the care scale. I don't know that they've done anything in particular than be their gorgeous selves, that, you know, it sits with me. But I think it's just that if I'm able to build empathy, the empathy that I share with them, then I'm able to go up to care. But, you know, that's a personal thing that I can do. It doesn't necessarily, it's not determined by them having to do anything.
Give me because empathy is one of those things that a lot of people, you know, I mean, you might not have seen this in New Zealand, but a whole heap of politicians in Canberra had to go through empathy training here in Australia, because apparently they didn't understand what it was like to be common humanly decent when people were reporting rape allegations. So I'm just curious as to when you talk about, oh, I have to be more empathetic. What does that actually look like or sound like? What does that mean for you?
For me, it means looking at it from where they potentially where they sit, their perspective, which may not be the same as, well, you know, is probably, if I'm losing the care factor, not, you know, not sitting the same as where I sit, but you know, I'm okay with, okay, I can understand that that's where, how it lands for you, or that's where you sit with it, which it doesn't have to sit that way, but I can, you know, empathize with them in that way. That's where it sits for me.
Yeah. One of the things I sometimes talk about is, you know, like it can be where you place the inflection or intonation. So sometimes we look at someone and go, Jesus, what is wrong with you? Right? But you could ask exactly the same question, going like, what is wrong with you? You know, or, you know, why won't you do your work? Well, why won't you do your work? It's exactly the same question, but, you know, being mindful of where we're putting the weight in that question. You know, up until this point, I just think they're wrong. You know, I just think but if I do come at it with genuine curiosity, like, I genuinely do not understand why you can't do what we're asking you to do here. Let's dig into that a little bit, and you know, rather than seeing it as a disciplinary thing or whatever it might be, actually coming at it with curiosity to see whether, at the end of the day, we probably won't agree on whatever it is, but as you say, if we have a little more empathy, perhaps it enables us to get above the line, and then we can start coming at it in a way where, let's be honest, if we're above that line of caring, we're more likely to be received well. We're more likely to have our feedback heard to some degree. If it comes across below that line, it's going to be seen as a threat, you know, and they're just going to arc up against it or run away from it. So I think it's an important play that leaders have to have, is check where they're putting that inflection and that intonation. Anyone else before we move on?
I was just going to say, I thought it was interesting from the podcast as well, and something that really resonated with me is when she spoke about, and I've definitely been guilty of saying this myself, is if people just did their job properly, there wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I've definitely found myself falling into that times before, and it sort of just goes in with what you were saying then, is how you change the friction of that statement.
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking about it in terms of, well, that becomes my job to find out why they aren't just doing their job.
Yeah.
And I think that can move you up the care personally line, because the more I think about it that way, the more you start to have slight care and empathy for that person. So for myself, that's something that stood out for me as well.
One of the things I've been playing with, and I may have said it in previous sessions that we've done here, but you know, when you hear someone say, why won't they just do their job? Or, you know, you hear a teacher, why won't they just do their work? It's kind of like, it comes from a real sense of exasperation, you know, they're done, just do your job. And one of the things I kind of reflect on is that if you're talking about educated professional adults, just do your job is the lowest we can set that bar. Just do your job. And no matter how low we set that bar, someone will always limbo under it, you know? So a better way of thinking about it, or a more effective way perhaps, is to raise the bar as high as we can, and then see, okay, as a leader, what's within my realm of influence to create conditions which help people rise to that bar? You know, that passive aggressive phrase of, oh, maybe I should just lower my standards. You know, I expect too much of people. No. The chances are there are things at play which are prohibiting these people from rising up towards the bar of high expectations. We talk about having it for kids all the time. And I just think that, you know, and I'm not discounting that in every workplace, there are very interesting people who will, you know, they're like a case study in challenge, right? But the vast majority of people, I believe, if we get the conditions right, will always go above and beyond. if they feel valued, if they feel that cared for, if they feel that their voice is heard, and all those kinds of things. So yeah, it's certainly an interesting one. Just do your job. Because the other side of it is, well, if they just did their job and that's all you need them to do, maybe we don't need you.
Yeah.
You know, like, if we're not. So it's an interesting one for sure. What I'd like you to do is, and I'm just going to stop the share now. I'm not stopping the share. I'm going to stop the record for this bit, if I can. Don't know what I'm doing. Stop record.